Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of Rheumatology Board Prep video. In the last video, we cover how to utilize certification exam blueprint from ABIM website and consolidate this information to the table of contents in Rheum Secrets. We also reviewed various learning tools that can be used, as well as some of the strategies available to stay engaged in active studying. For today's talk, I'll start by sharing some of the tips for first-year rheumatology fellows. Practice makes perfect, right? Right. So first-year fellows may wonder, should trainees start studying for boards during their first year of fellowship? Well, in my humble opinion, I would say no. There are several reasons for why I say this. But the biggest reason is because whatever information you memorize about different enzyme deficiencies and heritable diseases and whatnot, the chances are you won't remember them after a couple of months unless they're relevant in your day-to-day clinical experience. During my fellowship, I used to stress a lot about having to study for boards early on, but I think that was unnecessary. In retrospect, I should have spent more time reading core rheumatology topics like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis from Rheum Secrets and Rheum textbooks to build a strong foundation on bread and butter rheumatology topics. Really, there is no use or need to memorize different subtypes of Ehlers-Danlos and learning the differences between Gaucher disease and Fabry disease. All of those details you want to wait until the end of your studies so you can remember the details on the exam date. Remember the orange highlighted topics that I covered from part 1 of the series? This is not to say first-year fellows should not study. They should study. They should participate in daily reading if possible, but just not with the sole focus or purpose on prepping for the boards. If I could tell my younger self one thing about fellowship training, it'll be to worry less about boards, but to spend more time on clinical cases and learning about your patients. And I know this is easier said than done, but take each consult with joy and excitement and view them as opportunities to learn. Tip number 6, bring your copy of Rheum Secrets to work for note-taking. It may be helpful to bring your copy of Secrets to Didactics during fellowship to jot down any new relevant information in the margins of the corresponding chapters. This way, when you're ready to study for boards finally, your notes over the last 2 years of fellowship will be in your Secrets. Couple of caveats, you just cannot misplace the copy. That would be really bad. And number 2, it could just happen so that you're between 2 publications. In that case, you will have to buy the newer edition and just have to transfer your notes from the old copy to the new copy. This actually happened to me, but it wasn't that bad. It was a chance for me to just review my old notes. To reiterate, the question of when one should start studying during fellowship depends on personal preference, learning style, capabilities, and work schedule after graduation as well. But in general, I would not recommend any hardcore board studying during your first year of fellowship. Bottom line, focus on building a strong clinical rheumatology foundation instead. So how many hours a day should you be studying? Again, this is extremely subjective. Those with incredible memories who can retain information from just sitting and reading from Secrets will need very little time preparing. Unfortunately, that was not the case for me. I only learned with active learning, as I have previously told you, so I studied on average about 8 hours a day, which was very, very active studying. Just as reference, I needed more time studying for the Rheum boards compared to the internal medicine boards. For internal medicine, I studied for a total of 6 weeks. I was working full-time at the time, so during weekdays, I was studying about a couple hours a day. On the weekends, I did maybe 6 to 8 hours a day. Let's discuss how to actually plan your study schedule. So during my 10-day vacation after graduation from fellowship, I sat down and wrote down how many pages of Secrets, how many pictures of ACR images, and how many care questions there were. and how many times I wanted to review each of them, and how much time I would have to dedicate for studying. Then afterwards, it was just a matter of dividing up the time accordingly. I allotted more time for the initial couple of rounds, but later I tried to go over things faster. For example, I had 6 weeks to cover 730 pages of secrets during first round, 4 weeks for second round, 2 weeks for third round, and etc. You get the picture, right? I thought ideally I would like to go over everything at least 5 times, but soon realized that was not necessary. Again, you need to decide based on your past experiences how many times you need to go over each topic in order for you to commit things to memory. And here's tip number 7. I put a check mark in pencil next to the corresponding topic after each review in order to keep track of how many times I was studying each topic. It was a very visual way for me to keep track of what I was doing and what was left. Let's discuss how to break your day. Whenever I felt most energetic or awake, I studied secrets. When I felt lazy, I reviewed ACR images. And when I was sleepy, I did care questions. So in the morning when I wake up, this was when I felt most energetic. So I would engage myself in active studying by doing care questions or reading room secrets and transcribing that into my own handwritten notes. I sometimes recalled information from the night before on my whiteboards. In the afternoon, I would do more care questions. And nighttime after dinner, because I felt full and drowsy, I would review ACR images to get myself in the studying mode. And once I was in the studying mode, I would engage myself in active studying again. And this was when the memorization of information happened. Another helpful thing I did for myself was to set a deadline for bedtime each day. So this is not really a bedtime per se, but it's more time for me to stop studying. So let's say every night at 10 p.m. I told myself I'm going to stop studying. It was a way to get a good night's rest, but also I was able to stop procrastinating so much because I knew at a certain time I could stop studying and have some free time. Okay, why don't we change gears and talk about a topic that sometimes gets neglected by students during board prep, which is self-care. We all know as doctors that we need to take care of our own health first, and that encompasses physical, mental, and spiritual health. But the importance of self-care becomes more crucial at times of board prep when you're constantly working to push your limit and practice self-control every single day. It's a very tiring process. I learned from observing some of the best students in medical school that they're the ones with most self-discipline when it comes to taking care of their bodies. They knew when to work hard and when to play hard. They seemed to have a routine down for daily aerobic exercises and seemed to always eat very healthy. They were the ones carrying giant water bottles and eating apples between classes. In terms of diet, I highly recommend staying hydrated with water. I think there is no better drink out there than just pure water. Although on the test day, I did hydrate myself with Gatorade for electrolytes. And going along with that, good night's sleep is so important. Not just the night before the exam, but the entire duration that you're preparing for the exam. And some people like to meditate or pray or journal to keep their anxiety down. But if you're more of a social bug and you like to go out with friends, make sure to pencil that into your schedule as well. One last thing, I learned the importance of having a rest day or so-called Sabbath once a week, where you rest your brain and body completely. You may feel nervous doing this in the beginning because you may feel you're wasting an entire day, but you'll quickly realize this is actually going to make you more productive the following week. In the next slide, I am showing you some examples of foods I tried during my board prep. In the first picture, I had made kale and frozen berry smoothie from Costco. That was my regular go-to snack during my studies. Second picture, I have a baked cauliflower with pomegranate and green onions, which was surprisingly tasty. And next picture, I have a wild-caught salmon from Whole Foods and string beans, asparagus, and I believe zucchini mix. The last picture is showing my celebratory ice cream after my exam. Tip number 8, study timer from Amazon. So in the first picture behind the smoothie cup, you can see a small neon study timer, and this timer came in very handy during my studies. I got mine from Amazon for under $20. And what's really nice about this timer is that it's a very simple clock that lets you time yourself without any distractions. When the time is done, a really loud alarm will go off, or there's an option to turn off the alarm as well. So this was great because it minimized distractions by not having to have my phone out to use a timer, because before I knew it, I was on Instagram or Facebook, other social media, and a whole chunk of time would be lost. Oftentimes, I would tell myself when I didn't feel like studying, okay, I'll set the timer for just 15, 20, even 30 minutes, then stay focused during that time. And once the time was up, I had an option to take a break, or if I felt like it, I could set the timer for another 30, 45, 60 minutes and then repeat the process again. And before you know it, 2 hours of active studying done. And another bonus tip from this page is actually about fish, I know. So it's about salmon from Whole Foods. So salmon is a healthy nutrition for your brain, right? But I'm not a huge fan of salmon. So I opted for a high quality, low fat, wild-caught salmon from Whole Foods, and they were very delicious and much easier to digest because they were a lot thinner and leaner than farm-raised salmon, in my opinion. So if you're looking for some healthy study foods, this may be a good option for you. Okay, final countdown. How should you study the last few days? For tip number 9, and tip number 9 is probably the most important tip I can share from this entire series, and that is to make consolidated notes. So about 2 to 3 weeks prior to your exam, do a final review of everything. You will probably and hopefully know most of the stuff by this time, but there will be about 10 to 15% of stuff you just can't seem to remember. What I did for those 10% of confusing or hard to memorize facts were to consolidate them on blank 8x11s. In my case, I ended up with a small stack of papers consisting of maybe 20 to 30 pages with random facts. This is so helpful because you don't want to be flipping through 700 plus pages of secrets a few days before your exam, which can be anxiety provoking. Instead, you can just review your small stack of consolidated notes, which is in your own handwriting, so it's very easily recognizable. And as you're studying these notes, you're checking off what you already know. And as you can see in my notes, I have a whole bunch of check marks in pencil. That's what I was doing. So next time, I'm only focusing on the facts without the check marks, which saved a lot of time. About 3 to 4 days prior to the exam, you can start highlighting the most difficult to remember information and review only the highlighted things during your final review. With limited time and increasing anxiety before the exam, this was a lifesaver. One caveat though, in order for me to have this useful stack of notes, I had to first build a strong foundation in the beginning by doing everything else I told you that I did. But again, if you have a strong foundation and you stuck with your study schedule, this tip will be very valuable. What else can you do during your last few days? Number 1, you should minimize distractions. And number 2, do not get sick. This is so important. And this may mean staying away from certain social gatherings and continuing to eat healthy and getting regular sleep and taking a good care of yourself. D-1. The hard part is almost over by this time because you can now stop studying. Yes, you heard me correctly. You can stop and should stop studying at this time. A wise program director once told me that just as I have recommended a Sabbath once a week to get your brain ready to absorb more information the following week, you need to do the same the day before the exam. Personally, I couldn't just not do anything for an entire day, so I did some light studying until noon and then I stopped. I was also recommended to do things that are relaxing, like going to a spa or going out to eat. So if this is what's going to relax you, this is what you can do. For me, I just stayed home and had a low-key relaxing day with family. I had a super healthy supper with mixed grains, fresh salmon from Whole Foods again, and veggies, and went to bed early. Next, I have some comments regarding the actual test date. I found out that it is best to minimize or just eliminate wearing any jewelry on the test date if possible. Not sure if this is still the case, but at the testing site that I was at during the time that I was taking my test, they made everyone remove jewelry prior to entering the test site. The explanation I got for this restriction was that with the advancement of technology, people have found very creative ways to hide cameras inside their jewelry. I think they allowed wedding rings, but not sure about the engagement rings with big rocks. They asked me to remove my headband, bracelet, earrings, etc. It's just time-consuming and very annoying, so just don't wear them if you could. Next, healthy snacks and meals. I think you'll know by this time what works best in terms of healthy snacks on your test day. For me, I brought water, Gatorade, bite-sized chocolates, protein bars, and a light meal, as well as some oranges that were peeled, which felt so refreshing. Let's talk about when you should be arriving at the testing site. I suggest getting there at least 15 to 20 minutes before the exam time. The testing site I went to had first come, first served policy, and I realized that the quieter seats away from the door got taken first. And the rules keep changing regarding COVID, so make sure to review the rules of the local testing site that you will be at regarding the COVID rules. And bring an extra face mask just in case the old one gets dirty or something like that. Bonus tip. This is a trick I found out during internal medicine boards. But there's an option to change the color of the background and your text. And it's found on the top right-hand corner of the screen. I'm not sure why, but I personally prefer the black or dark background with white letters, which I felt were less tiring on my eyes. Again, depends on personal preference, but you could kind of play with the option during the tutorial before the exam begins, so I just wanted you to know that this option was available to you. My thoughts after the exam. Okay, so first question, how hard was it? Some questions were extremely straightforward, and they were you either know it or you don't kind of questions. You know, the ones that require pure memorization. And I had one question where I absolutely had no clue, and it was regarding a mechanism of action, but later I found out that it was actually in room secrets. But I felt pretty confident about all the other straightforward questions. The long stem questions towards the end became much more difficult for me to focus on, however. But having good snacks and good night's rest the night before will definitely help, which is the reason why I'm emphasizing this point so much. Overall, the level of complexity is probably similar to in trainings. The ACR images. So I was bummed about how little ACR images were on my exam. I think maybe I had one picture that was straight up from ACR webpage, but that was about it. Other pictures were similar to ACR images, so I was able to identify them, but still, I had maybe a total of 3 images on my exam. I felt I spent way too much time going over the images. Care questions. These actually helped me a lot. They helped me practice processing questions and breaking it down and trying to understand the intention of the test writers and knowing also why the wrong answer is the wrong choice. And some of the questions were extrapolation of care questions, so I don't regret doing this. Lastly, as I mentioned before, it may have been nice to do the 100 board type questions from Room Secrets. So if you're a type of person who learns best by doing questions, know that this option is available to you. Final thoughts. Well, I was surprised as I was studying for rheum boards how much stuff I learned in fellowship through clinical experience and how relevant knowledge gained from clinical training actually was to board prep. I really feel the best board prep is your clinical experience, as it will build a strong foundation for when you're ready to study for boards. I immensely enjoyed studying for rheum boards, as it was really nice to have some designated time to buckle down and actually commit things to memory. And I realize my methods of board prep may feel like an overkill for some of you, and your study plan may look drastically different from what I showed you, and that is perfectly fine. You gotta do what works for you. As long as you're organized and you stay committed to the plans that works for you, you will be fine. And if you realize after a couple of weeks that something is not working, you can always adjust your plans. Just don't change your plans too often, because doing so will be time-consuming and counterproductive. Okay guys, that's a wrap. I hope you found this video helpful and applicable, and hopefully some of the tips I shared during the two-part series gave you some practical ideas that will help you stay organized and focused during your board prep. If you liked this video, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to watch similar videos in the future. Thanks for visiting, and good luck with studying. You guys will rock.